topic for quite a few people, because most people tend to think, oh, we have to have Israel as an ally because they've been an ally for so long, without really actually examining uh, the actual situation. Now, the first thing we need to look at is how Israel was formed. Now, if you go back in my videos, you'll actually see that they were not formed at World War II, but actually, how a lot of people think, but actually from World War One and the Treaty of Versailles. This is basically what happened was the United Kingdom said to the Palestinian people, here, you're out, we're making a new country, we're taking all of these Eastern European immigrants from our country and we're exiling them down there. Now, while this wasn't fair to the Eastern European immigrants who had come into the United Kingdom, uh, and they could have easily done other things, such as either keeping them there in the United Kingdom and not being anti-Semitic, or had they been problematic for the United Kingdom, they could have actually sent them back to Eastern Europe, to their actual original countries, had it actually been that much of a drain on the economy. Uh, but instead, they actually felt to actually exile them and actually ruin the lives of a bunch of people down there, and actually to create a new country and kick people out of their homes who've actually been out of their homes for over a century now, or around a century, I should say. Now, with this situation, you need to think about the what the Palestinians would feel about if they were put into that situation. Now, if you were living in your home right now, and another country basically said, "Hey, we have these refugees, and we don't like them in our country, so we're gonna just toss them all the way in your country, and then they're gonna take your homes, and we're just gonna shove you somewhere else in this deserted area of uninhabitable land." And you can't say anything about it. And if you try to go back to your home, we're gonna give them the full right to basically kill you, which is essentially what happened. Now, this is basically what we see with the situation with Israel. Now, that's not exactly any type of a fair type of a plan. Now, while I'm saying we can't really do anything now with that, we can at least come up to some type of a solution to where we can at least get a wider span and actually create some type of an ability to create an situation to where Palestinian people can actually have some type of normality in life and be able to enter back and forth through Israel and be able to call that home just as well as the people in Israel would be able to call Palestine home, and go back and forth instead of creating this turmoil. But that's not what we have right now. The other thing we need to look at is Israel really an actual ally? Now, if you look at historically, they have not really been an ally. They've, when they were aligned with the United Kingdom as being part of their property, they backed Idi Amin in a war against against the actual people. And this is where actually Benjamin Netanyahu's brother died, again, fighting in that war, in which Palestinian people actually went to actually try and liberate the people. This is where a lot of the tensions actually rose between Palestinians and Israelis, is because you had the actual Israelis backed by the United Kingdom, and the Palestinians who were actually backing the people who were under an oppressive socialist regime. And what we see with it is basically is Israel has always been really, since its foundation, a socialist regime, socialist country that has really kept to that tie. Even though after World War II, when more people came down, which made the situation even worse, even though they could have essentially stayed in these countries, they went down there and they created essentially a completely socialist country, which is essentially just copying exactly what they had in countries such as like Nazi Germany, and all they were doing was recreating Nazi Germany down there, but instead they are making themselves the leaders, and essentially making the Palestinians taking the role of Jews and other unwanted minorities. And it was just flipping the roles of the people. And as time went on with it, they were basically making other people, instead of making it through high taxation, they were making other people pick up the bill. And this is where a lot of U.S. foreign policy errors come into play. And this is where the United States have actually picked up the bill, and even the leadership has actually been caught on hot mics talking about how they're just going to make the United States pay for whatever they want, no matter what happens. And this even leads us to to some of the ideas of boycott movements, to boycott Israel for reasons for militarism and for the government waste that is caused in the United States, which is really not even politically aligned with any specific group. They even went as far as to basically blacklist them through lobbying in the United States, to basically create it to where these people that are aligned with these groups cannot find any work or with the public sector, or if they are found with it, they're essentially immediately fired for that reason. And when we see this situation like this is basically showing that they're essentially relying on countries like the United States to essentially support a socialist program, and being able to use essentially the force of lobbying to essentially, and slander to essentially silence these groups that have any type of opposition. Now let's look into the idea of actually, is Israel actually an ally? Now, we need to first say, do they actually respect the people of the United States as being able to let them live their lives? Well, the fact is no. We've already discussed that they will actually spy on the United States to essentially make sure that they're not creating any type of law that would eliminate funding, and no groups are popping up that would actually cause any type of economic situation that would actually stop any type of funding to their country. Now, this is not exactly the way an ally would work. Allies should not be essentially spying on another country that they're allied with. That's not the way country relationships work. They should be respecting the ideas of free speech and let legislation pass as it will, regardless of if it's negative. If it's going to be negative for your country, you should react as legislation is passed to see if it's beneficial to your country, to see if you should be allied with that nation after the fact, not trying to block it before the fact. That's not how countries work. The other point is, we need to look at how do they react when the United States has been attacked. And the fact is they militarily have not backed us up at all in any of these endeavors. They've basically sat around and done nothing. The only time in which they will engage on anything is when they feel that they can essentially goad us into a military conflict, and those are the only ones in which they feel they want to enter into in the ones that they were interested in the first place, such as the Iraq War. This is one in which Benjamin Netanyahu was one of the people pushing for it, along with people in the Bush administration, such as like John Bolton. They were actually pushing for a war with Iraq, even though there was no actual intelligence suggesting any weapons of mass destruction. They were actually going out to the UN and going out to Congress to actually state that there was, and that there was this big, massive threat, even though there was no such thing. The other thing is, you will see that they put that Israel has also, under Netanyahu, has also pushed for wars that really have no interest in U.S. involvement, such as trying to push for war against Iran and claiming that they have nuclear weapons. He's been making this claim ever since the late 1980s. Now, if we look at it, they've only even had the technology over the last few years at best, and this shows that basically is that they've been making up accusations based on being wanting to go to war and wanting to go to the U.S. into a war with Iran. Now, if you look at historically with Iran, we can go back to Persia, which is what Iran was before, and we see that they're not actually an imperialistic nation. They would have called Shia Islam has not historically been imperialistic. It's just not in their charter of beliefs. Now, if you look at the opposition, which is Sunni Islam, which Israel has been had ties with, especially Saudi Arabia, we see that they are highly imperialistic, and we have seen such things as caliphates, which are directly linked to Sunni Islam. And this is why we need to look at why they would actually be linked to them beyond their fervor for actual starting of war. Now, there would be no reason for them to actually be linked with extremist nations for actually starting these wars, unless they actually had the idea that they could actually have backing and it would be financially beneficial. Because if you look at the idea of them being linked with an actual country that would actually want to essentially spread their influence throughout the area, it would actually not be beneficial to them unless they think they're going to get something out of it. Now, this relationship is actually extended well beyond just within the last few years and just within the last time of oil being prevalent for their needs. This has gone well past that point. And if they were actually looking at what would be the best interest for an ally such as the U.S., they wouldn't be looking at going with someone who would be shown to have direct links with extremist Sunni groups that have actually caused serious disruptions within the region and that have actually caused huge blowback to the United States. That's not what an ally does. Another thing is we can look at where they have started. I mean, you look at other things such as their actual start with the conflict with Palestinians. Much of that was under the creation of Hamas. Well, most people don't realize is what's been declassified is Hamas was not created by the Palestinians, but actually done as a PR stunt by Israel, by the Mossad to actually badmouth the Palestinians. as a way to essentially goat the U.S. into going against the Palestinians and essentially getting them into war. And this shows that they're really not essentially interested in a positive relationship with the U.S. They're more interested in just actually using the U.S. And it really shows you with it, even the way they conduct in war itself. They're using white phosphorus, which is actually a chemical agent in which it causes massive chemical burns and even leads to birth defects later on down the road. And it's in many ways it's been banned for actual military use for a good reason. And this is why they're really considered to be kind of an outsider when it comes to military conduct. They're not exactly using proper military conduct, and even when it comes to being forthcoming on the ownership of nuclear weapons, they're one of the few countries within the region that has not been fully forthcoming on stating that they have nuclear weapons, in which people know that they do. Every other country that has them has stated obviously that they do. They're the ones to say that they don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, but when Netanyahu has been questioned, does he have nuclear weapons, he'll tend to spin around and say that's not part of the deal, and he doesn't want to disclose that because that's classified information. Well, when it comes to that with it, if you want someone to disarm their nuclear weapons, you better be willing to disarm yours, because it's going to have to be reciprocation. That's the way that these things go. If you're pointing a gun at someone else with it, don't tell them to drop their gun first if you're not willing to drop yours as well. This is the way the thing goes. So if you're looking at an actual thing with it, allyship, they're not exactly the greatest of allies. And what the last point is what most people tend to go to is, oh, but they're the only Jewish nation out there. Well, are we really looking at a nation that should be a theocracy for something that we should be looking up to? There's plenty of theocracies out there. You have Islamic theocracies out there within the region, and they are oppressive. Should we really be looking up to these oppressive regimes as something we should be thinking as something good as an ally? I don't think that's exactly what we should be aligning ourselves with. Because if you look at all of the Western-style governments, they're not theocracies. They show for a freedom of religion, that you can worship whatever religion you want. There's going to be freedom of press. If you look at out Israel, there is no freedom of press. They only have certain limited ones with it, and they will even the government will even start harassing certain certain press outlets if they start getting too close when there's corruption, such as the Netanyahu corruption cases that have been going around. And this is something that people should be very, very worried about. And you should not have a country that's basically a theocracy that should be viewed as a great ally. That's not what a great ally is. Now, you can have a majority of one religion within a country. We have plenty of those out there. If you look out at like the Philippines have been very, very loyal to the United States. Now, they might say they dislike certain leaders in our country at certain times because they're not going to take demands from our country, but they're still going to respect their country, and the people of the Philippines love our country as a way of life. Their whole system is based on our whole constitution, and this is a country that the majority of it, well over 80%, is Catholic. That would technically be a majority of one type of religion. In fact, well over 95% of the country is actually Christian. So if you're looking at something that is only one religion, virtually, you're talking, they are a great example. There are a lot of countries, even within Europe, that are majority Christian as well, that we can look through. There are many countries within the Americas and the Caribbean that are the same way, that are majority Christian. Or it could be something else. But if you look in Asia, with Northeast Asia, you'll find countries that are going to be majority of Asian different Asian religions, depending on the region. And this is where you're going to find a lot of different variances. And this is what happens when you don't have a theocracy, but you actually have an actual system based on the freedom to practice what you want, but what actually comes along with the freedom. Now, when you start to actually enforce a specific religion, or like in the case of China, you enforce worship of the state, like in socialism or communism, you're going to get something that's horrible. And these should not be embraced at all. I mean, this is not what America should be allying itself with. I mean, people can disagree with it, and they can say, oh, but what about the Jewish people? Well, Israel, just because they claim themselves as a Jewish state, does not mean that this is what Jewish people really believe in. If you look at Jews, that's not the only place. There's Jews all along the world. In fact, as with making a reference to the Philippines, many people during the Spanish Inquisition that were actually Jewish actually moved out to the Philippines. Even though the Philippines were a Christian nation that was actually a Spanish colony, they were still very, very accepting of these Jewish people that were coming there, and were not exposing them to the Spanish Inquisition. This was something that ended up being a refuge for these people. And you're going to see, and still in Europe and throughout the Americas, that people can still be Jewish, remain with their heritage, and not actually have to have an actual state. They can actually embrace other people around them. They can actually have their different neighborhoods without actually having the fact of enforcing such bad ideas like what they've had out there, such as enforcing the idea of trying to steal from the United States, spying on the United States, trying to basically enforce their ideas on the United States, and trying to drag other nations within war, which is not exactly a positive idea. Basically, Israel, what you have essentially is they took the idea of Nazi Germany, which is a National Socialist Workers' Party regime, and they basically took this socialist idea, and instead of basically making it to where you had Jews and other minorities as the victims, they essentially made it to where Jews were essentially the victimizing party, and they were basically making everybody around them essentially pay for whatever they felt were wronged with them, and anybody around them basically got shafted. And this is not right for any stretch of the imagination, and you should not be aligned with it. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish. If you're a United States Jew, you should not basically say that this is right. You should basically embrace the idea of life and freedom. You shouldn't be embracing the ideas of socialism and tyranny and war and bloodshed just because, hey, that guy over there in that country has the same religion as me. That doesn't mean you have anything in common. It's just like black people here. They were brought over in slave ships. They really don't have anything in common with a lot of the oppression that was going on in South Africa right now, because the fact is the South African people that are actually calling for the death of the white farmers are nothing like the black people in the United States that are actually trying to live and work a decent living. There's nothing like one another. And this is what needs to be understood, is just because you share one thing in common does not mean you share anything really totally in common. You need to create that distinction. There's a big distinction. And just because you think you should be allied with them, there's nothing that should be allied with any group like that. This is an aberration of society and really should be looked down upon. Any type of group like that really wants to do harm to other people. It doesn't matter what they call themselves. I don't care if they call themselves Jewish, Christian, whatever. Any type of group that wants to basically kill people around them, make them live under basically socialism, but make someone else pay the bill, this is a horrible group of people. When they do that, it doesn't matter what circumstance they were put under, it's still not right. And they can't, you can't just say, hey, look at my past. You never lived under that past. This is now. You need to look at now. Just because something bad happened then does not mean you can say, look at back then and say, look what happened. Because the fact is, none of those people would ever state that this is right. They would say what you're doing is horribly, horribly wrong, and that this should never be tolerated. That's why a lot of the people that actually do not condone this attitude did not go out to Israel. They actually, a lot of them, they either stayed or went out to the Americas, including North and South America, or even went out to East Asia. This is where a lot of them went. And there's a reason why, because they felt that they could make a better living out there. They did not want to go out to somewhere else and basically make someone else's life a living hell and just repeat exactly what they were doing and just put all the hell that would happen to them onto someone else. That's not what someone who actually wants to be successful wants to do. When you do that, all you're doing is you're basically making someone else's life miserable, and you're doing it just for revenge. And you're not even getting revenge on the right people. You're just getting revenge on some innocent person. You're just passing the buck along. And this is really what the state of Israel was and still is. And even as much as other people like Milton Friedman have tried to bring capitalism out there, the people out there don't want capitalism. They state, no, we want our handouts, we want our free stuff, and we don't want to pay for it. And this is why people out in Israel, if you look at their basically their well-being next to the people in the Americas, you will see that the people in Israel are more well off than the people in the United States. And this is a sick and sad fact. And that the fact is we're paying for their well-being, and the fact is they basically say, hey, we need a new war because we don't like those people, and we think you should not like them too. And they drag all the mainstream media to spin all these facts, and they say, oh, but Christians and Jews need to stick together, and you're our ally. And you have been for so many years. And just because they say they're an ally does not mean it. You need to look at the actual facts. You need to look at the ideologies. And you need to actually look at what's really going on. Now, I know it's going to be a little bit hard to view this video, but this is really what the facts are. Now, I hope you enjoy this video. Like it. Subscribe to my channel. And click the notification bell, and see you tomorrow with another good video. Bye.